Hey friends, my name is Danny and this is Ale and Agony. How are we diddly doing? Welcome on in. Let's get cozy and talk about murder. But before we get into today's case, I wanted to thank you for your patience. As you may have noticed, there was no upload last week as I've been super poorly, which is also a terrible time for our boiler to pack up. So on top of that, we now have no heating and no hot water. So big yikes. But I'm on the mend, I have some medication, and I am ready to go. So let's start with the ale of this week's episode. I am drinking a can of Bangin with the 1G. Bangin. It's an Indian pale ale from Stew Mosto. So get yourself cozy because I will be telling you about the case of LaVena Johnson. So let's crack it open. Oh wow, I can smell that already. Damn, that's a hoppy boy. LaVena Johnson was born in July 1985 to her father, Dr. John Johnson, and her mother, Linda Johnson. Levina was one of 5 children. Her father described her as very disciplined. She was the first girl born into the family, and she really pushed herself to excel. She was a musician, an active member of her church and community, and at only 4 months old, she received her first honours when she was named Baby of the Year at Walnut Park Church, where the Johnson family worshipped. And after working really hard, Levina became an honour student at her high school in Missouri. And rather than popping off to college, Levina decided to follow in her father's footsteps, and she joined the military to help pay for her college education. Her father, John, said that she didn't want them to have to pay for her college education on top of everything else that they'd done for her. She wanted to earn her own money and pay her way. And what a kid! Because at this point, she's still a teenager, and she makes this massive decision to join the army. And as I said at the beginning, John has also served in the army for 25 years. And so he has no concerns with Levina enrolling. Levina was in the military for less than 8 weeks when she was deployed to Iraq as a private first class, and she was stationed at Balad. I imagine that this would be really scary because she was only 19 at this time, and she'd barely been in the army for 2 minutes, and then she was shipped off to a war zone. And when she originally signed up, she was told that that was highly unlikely. She phoned home almost every day, and her last call home was on the 17th of July, 2005. She was excited. She was told that she may be leaving earlier than expected and might be coming home for Christmas. And she said, "Don't you decorate that tree without me." But 2 days later, at 7:30 a.m. on the 19th of July, the doorbell rang, and a soldier was stood on the porch of the family home, and he said that LaVena L. Johnson died earlier that morning of self-inflicted wounds. And this was only 8 days before her 20th birthday. Upon hearing this tragic news, her father John fell back onto the porch step and her mother started screaming. They were told that her death was being investigated, but they didn't confirm if self-inflicted wounds meant suicide. But 2 days later, a casualty liaison arrived at the Johnson home and told her father that it would be best for them to have a closed casket funeral. The cause of death was suicide by an M16 rifle. Levina had been found at 1:20 a.m. She was laying on the floor, face up, with her right arm across her face, with her right forearm over the bridge of her nose. She was fully clothed, lying next to her cot, and on the other side of her cot, laying in line with her body, was her M16 rifle. A closed casket recommendation would allude to Levina being severely disfigured from the gunshot, and so it's understandable that they made the recommendation. But that is just not what the Johnson family wanted. And so they proceeded with an open casket funeral, and Levina was dressed in her military uniform. And as her sister Lakeisha looked at Levina's face, she saw what had really happened. Levina had been badly beaten, and her face was covered in bruises. John said that her nose had obviously been broken, and it looked like she'd been given cosmetic surgery to realign it, but they'd clearly not referenced any photos of Levina because her nose sat totally different than it would do naturally. Looking at Levina, John had to search to find the gunshot wound, which, given she shot herself with an M16 rifle, it should be pretty bloody obvious where it is. A close-range shot from such a high-caliber weapon such as an M16 rifle would be devastating. As John continued to look over his daughter, he realised that they had glued her white service gloves onto her hands. Like, why the fuck would you need to glue someone's gloves onto their hands? John was advised after the funeral that he would get updated by the coroner immediately after he had examined Levina, and once her cause of death had been established. So Levina died on the 19th of July, and the autopsy was carried out on the 22nd. But John didn't get his update until the 3rd of August. Ed Reedy was the coroner, and the first thing that John asked is if a rape test was done, to which Ed confirmed no. A rape test wasn't carried out. He confirmed that there was no sign of a struggle. And I'm not sure who he was looking at, because it clearly wasn't Levina, because she had broken teeth, a broken nose, and black eyes. So John tells Ed that he saw the bullet hole. It was small, and it was on the left side of Levina's head, but she's right-handed. So how would that have happened? Ed told John that he must have seen the exit wound, as Levina had actually put the rifle in her mouth and shot herself that way. This is believed to be physically impossible, as Levina was a quite short woman. She was only 5'1", and if you convert that into inches, that's 60 inches. And an M16 rifle is 40 inches. The rifle is 2/3 of her body length. And it must be impossible to position that into your mouth and still be able to reach down to pull the trigger. When John says this to the coroner, he simply says, "She managed," and determined the cause of death to be a suicide. John could tell something was wrong. His daughter had black eyes, she had broken bones. There's no way that she would have done that to herself and then shot herself. So John spent the next 10 months asking the army for the records and documentation on Levena's death, because he wanted to find out what really happened to his daughter in Iraq. Something wasn't adding up here. Why had they reconstructed her nose? And why had they recommended a closed casket funeral when she looked relatively normal? The gunshot wound was quite small and it was actually hidden under her fringe. When John eventually got the official documents, it stated that Levena's death was originally recorded as a result of hostile action in combat. But Levena worked in telecommunications. She wasn't stationed out in the line of duty. She was stationed indoors. The documents then went on to say that Levena was not mentally sound at the time of her death. She was depressed and spoke often about killing herself. But the interviews with her fellow officers that were in the same report said that she was clearly happy and she was fit both mentally and physically. So where did they get this idea of depression and suicide? John put these questions forward to them, and the letter he got back said that Levena had been in a relationship with another soldier when stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. They were known to be in a relationship, but they'd broken up. And they then went on to say that Levena had also been given a recent diagnosis of a sexually transmitted disease called condyloma, which is similar to genital warts. When the supposed ex-boyfriend soldier was questioned, he said that he and Levena were just friends. They went to church together, and the soldier's name was never released. Another odd note in the report was that Levena was eating more ice cream than usual. Like, number one, how the fuck do you know that? And how is that a sign of depression? The woman is stationed in a hot, hot desert. I think she may want some ice cream from time to time. It feels very cliché. Why would a woman possibly be depressed? Oh, it must be because she broke up with her boyfriend and she's so sad that she's eating her feelings with all this ice cream. Inside these documents was something useful. John was given an estimated timeline on Levena's last movements. And it goes like this. No timestamp. PV2 Johnson misses PT appointment with redacted. 1800 hours. PV2 Johnson is in redacted room. 21:15. Redacted went to PV2 Johnson's room, but she was not there. 2200 hours. PV2 Johnson seen in redacted room by redacted. 22:45. PV2 Johnson departs with redacted to go to the PX. 23:45. Redacted walks PV2 Johnson to Section A of the housing area. 0:100 hours. Redacted returns to his room. 01:20. PV2 Johnson's body is found by redacted. So I know that's quite difficult to follow, especially if you're not into, military time. But what it's saying is that at 6 p.m, she's seen in redacted's room. And then at 10 p.m, she's seen in that room still by someone else. At 11:15, Levina departs with redacted to go to the PX. An hour later, she's then walked home. And then 15 minutes later, redacted returns to his room. So she's been with someone between 6 and potentially midnight. So John makes a great point regarding the timeline, because Levina was apparently with Mr. Redacted for quite some time. But there's no interview paperwork in the report from this guy who spent nearly 6 hours with Levina on the night that she died. And this man has never come forward, and he's never been named. But surely he's a huge piece of this puzzle. I would also imagine that there are security cameras stationed around the barracks, particularly in the PX, which is like the base exchange. So it's where you can go and buy home comforts and use the post office. But no video footage was ever put forward. So after receiving this information, John pressed them for photos of the crime scene and from the coroner's report. And rather than sending John the files digitally, they scanned the original photos in black and white and sent him those instead. And oh my goodness, the state of these photos, they're like someone put the contrast up to max and then put a grain filter over the top. Whoever scanned them could not give two shits about relaying any details over to John. The quality is just awful. But within those photos, they had Xeroxed a copy of a compact disc labelled as containing all photographic images and originals. But why would someone scan a CD? It's either it was a mistake or it was a clue. So John, of course, asks for a copy of the disc so he can get better copies of the crime scene and autopsy photos. But he was denied because the images showed other soldiers who were not involved in Levena's case. So John contacted their local Missouri congressman representative, William Lacey Clay. And this wonderful man called out the army on national television. It was during an interview regarding accuracy of battlefield information during the congressional hearings over another soldier's death. And he asked the Inspector General if he had received his Freedom of Information request to receive a copy of that CD. And he was told that as soon as they received the request, they would process it. And because of this, so they did. And what this CD showed John was horrifying. I'm going to try and give details of the images so you don't go out there and find them. There is a documentary that I watched that I will link, but be warned, all of the graphic images are in there. And by graphic images, I mean there are pictures of Levena's brain, there are pictures of her headshot wound, there are pictures of her found in her barracks. The pictures are very detailed, so I'll try and explain them. Images on the CD showed Levena laying face up in her barracks, and she was wearing her PT uniform. Her right arm was covering her face, with her right forearm over the bridge of her nose. Her head was heavily surrounded by a pool of blood, and the photo showed that Levena was laying next to her cot, and her M16 rifle was laying on the other side of the cot, parallel to her body. So, if Levena had put the rifle in her mouth and pulled the trigger, how is it that she would end up in this position with her gun so far away? There was no blood splatter to prove that she was sat on the edge of her cot and shot herself there, because I thought, okay, maybe, she was sat on the edge of her cot, she fell one way, the rifle fell the other, but that's just not the case. Another photo shows Levina with her broken nose, and the image has a ruler going across her nostrils, and you can see from that it's clearly concaved right to left, and it's obviously broken. John did say that it looked like her nose had been reconstructed badly, and here was the evidence. Her jaw was also broken, but it wasn't off to the side to match the break in her nose. If you imagine your bottom row of teeth, the break is almost straight down the middle between your two front teeth. And her molars somehow ended up splitting the inside of her upper lip with the blow that broke the jawbone. So the broken nose appears to be a blow from the side, and then the break to the jaw looks like it may be more face on in the middle. So I think that they must be two separate blows to Levena's face. More images also showed numerous lacerations all over Levena's face, along with an edema on her cheek. And an edema, it looks like an indent in the skin. Another image showed her left eye is hanging down lower than her right eye. It's not out of the socket or anything, it just looks like perhaps her eye socket has been broken and her eye is almost drooping down. Another image shows Levina on her back, but her hands have now been wrapped in brown paper evidence bags and they've been taped around her wrists. So this must link to her gloves being glued onto her hands at the funeral. So something must have happened to her hands. Levena's labia were also swollen and blistered on one side with more lacerations, along with further burn marks to the back of her right thigh. And at first, the thought crossed my mind that maybe this could be a result of an at-home treatment for the genital warts gone horribly wrong. But that's just not the case. Someone has intentionally mutilated Levena's genitals. And different reports say different thing. Some speculate that they are acid burns, but the records do show that there's a can of hairspray and a book of matches that were found at the scene. The only reason I can think that someone would burn her genitals is to try and remove some form of DNA, perhaps to cover up a sexual assault. And again with her hands, I assume that they were also burnt. Perhaps Levena got some DNA under her fingernails and they were trying to destroy the evidence. But Levena was found fully clothed, and her clothing was not damaged by any substance. So if it was acid or if it was fire, none of her clothing was damaged. So it seemed that she was dressed after her genitals were burnt. Otherwise, her clothing would also be damaged, and it just isn't. Going back to the M16 rifle, the bullet for an M16 rifle is like a long, thin, narrow bullet with a small tip. And you'll have to forgive me because I know very little about guns. I'm based in the UK, we don't really have very many. But due to the amount of gunpowder in the M16 bullet, it emits a burst of gunpowder residue once it's fired. And the bullet would cause huge damage to the brain and essentially rip it apart. Levena had no gunshot residue on her hands, which would have to be present if she was the one that shot the bullet. Her brain was also not in a condition related to this kind of bullet. It looked much more like a handgun bullet. The damage was minimal, and the hole in her brain was small, much like a handgun bullet, which are much chodier in comparison to the M16 bullet. So John compiled all of this information that the army gave him, and he sent it right back to them. And they just weren't interested. They maintained that Levena committed suicide. So they maintained that Levena broke her own nose, her lower jawbone. She somehow burnt the back of her right thigh. She cut up her own genitals and attempted to set them on fire. She damaged her hands so badly that they had to be wrapped in evidence bags, and somehow was able to defy the laws of physics and use her 5'1" frame to position the 40-inch rifle into her mouth and pull the trigger, and somehow managed to get 0 gunshot residue on her hands. And at this point, John just felt, I can't imagine, so let down. He served for the army for 25 years. And he's getting absolutely stonewalled. Every time he goes to them saying, I have this evidence, I have these questions, they're just not interested. So he felt like he had no other option left but to approach the news media with the information, in the hopes of escalating the story and reopening the case for Levina. And at first, it escalated to Ike Skelton, the head of the House Armed Services Committee, and his report stated, quote, "It is my opinion that further investigative effort by our subcommittee would not find anything to change the findings and conclusions of what appear to be a very professional investigation." End quote. Like, how? How is that the response? Apparently, he released that statement after receiving a briefing on Levena's death, so he didn't even read through the information that John had put forward. John then met with the Army Criminal Investigations Division in Congressman Clay's office, and John concealed a microphone in his pocket for the discussion. They then went on to reveal that there were burned pieces of paper under the window of the barrack, and a 5.56mm shell casing was found under Levena's right leg. And this, of course, is just fucking stupid, because they claim that Levena shot herself through the mouth, but the shell casing somehow ended up ejecting out of the gun and winding up under her body. Frustratingly, news outlets just wouldn't cover the story. No one seemed to be interested, and no one has ever been named a suspect. And I'd love to know who Mr. Redacted is, because clearly they've got some fucking information. Christopher Gray of the Criminal Investigation Command said the army stands by its findings, but they added that investigators would reopen the investigation should credible information surface. And to this day, the case remains closed as a suicide. And to me, it feels like, as an outsider, the army is just assuming that families will accept the death of their soldiers. Cover the deaths in duty and honour, give the families some medals, cover the coffin with an American flag, and hope that no one questions them. But as an army veteran, John had so much more knowledge than another family might have, and so he saw the holes in the stories. He knew where he had to go to get the extra documents, he knew how to work the system to get his hands on the photos, and he's just kept pushing and pushing. I believe that the army wanted Levena's family to be embarrassed of the situation, to not question it, to let it go. Because many families, unfortunately, do feel a lot of shame from their child committing suicide, let alone them finding out that their daughter has an STD, that she broke up with a secret boyfriend that she never told them about, and that she was depressed. And don't forget about all that ice cream that she was eating. But John just wants justice for his child. Between 2003 and 2013, 98 female soldier deaths were reported in Iraq, 18 of which were reported as non-combat related, along with LaVena Johnson. Private First Class Tina Priest was another 19-year-old woman who went over to Iraq, and like Levina, she called home almost every day. Tina confided in her mum that she'd been raped and she was receiving counselling. But she said that she wasn't depressed about what happened to her, but she was very angry. But only 10 days later, after confiding in her mother, Tina was found dead in her barracks. It was reported that she put an M16 rifle in her mouth and killed herself. Ballistics showed that Tina was 5'2" and her arms are not long enough to pull the trigger on an M16 rifle. That sounds familiar. But her mother was told that she must have used her big toe to pull the trigger. Rape in the military is now called command rape. It happens so often that it has its own name. Men in the military are using their titles to convince their victims that no one, will believe them. And it's common that women are raped in the first few months of their service, and their senior officers are taking advantage of the situation rather than helping out the new recruits. And I honestly don't know how to end this episode, because it's quite infuriating, really, because after looking at all the evidence, I don't understand how the army can maintain that this was a suicide. It doesn't make any sense to me. There's just so many things about it that just don't make any sense. And there's no answers. And John has tried so hard, and he's gone through Congress. He's used all of his cards he can from being an ex-veteran. If anyone was going to get the answers, I feel like John is the man that's going to do it. But we still have no information on why the gloves were glued to her hands. We have no information on why she had burns on her genitals. We don't understand why she had black eyes, a broken nose, a broken jaw. None of it alludes to a suicide. And the fact she can't even pull the bloody trigger, it's just infuriating. But anyway, should we take it back to the beginning? Because unfortunately, no one has ever been charged, no one's ever been arrested. The army maintains it was a suicide, and there is no happy ending. Not that there ever is, but there's no feeling of justice. So let's take it back to the beginning. How was my ale? I'll be honest, I've only had like 2 sips of it because I've been so enraged by this story. It's nice though. I'm not gonna lie, I like the name. I like the fact it's called Bangin. And I've never heard of Stew Mostow. It is a hoppy boy though. Like, it's got a strong smell to it as well. I say, like, it's quite fruity. Like, it's light in colour. It's a 6.2% though, so you're going to imagine it's going to have a bit of a punch to it, isn't it? I think it's grapefruit as well. But I've never heard of Stew Mostow. Apparently they're the brewing house or brewer. Maybe he's just a guy on his own who does it in the shed. Not sure. Either way, very tasty. I'm afraid I'm not quite sure where you can get it. I have had a look online and I can't find anywhere because I got it in my Brewdog box for the month. So yeah, that's not very helpful, is it? Sorry. This episode's just full of bad fucking news, isn't it? Sorry, guys. Oh, gosh. In the episode show notes, you will find the link to the documentary that I watched on YouTube. It is done by a standalone person that doesn't normally do true crime. And I think what they've done is they've taken the Silent Truth documentary, which you can access if you're in America on Amazon Prime. And I think it's also on HBO. But I can't get hold of it, unfortunately. Not even if I try and pay for it, I can't get it. So this guy did kind of merge it all together, but it's a bit sort of choppy and a bit back to front in places. But you get the gist of it. It was very good. But as I said, very gruesome images are in there, so please do be warned. You can find updates about new episodes over on Twitter and Instagram, and I will post the photos of this case over on the Instagram page. I will not include many explicit images, but I'll put them at the end with a tag anyway, so hopefully you won't accidentally scroll onto them. And both pages can be found under Ale and Agony. And if you would like to support the show and you have some spare cash and you want to throw it at me, then you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/aleandagony. And I will be sure to give you a shout out next episode. And you can also access some cheeky bonus content from time to time. I'm actually now ensuring that I do an upload to Patreon of some description every Monday. And I would of course be super grateful for any feedback and more reviews on Apple Podcasts. I feel cheeky asking for 5-star reviews. Obviously they're the best kind. But if you don't want to give me 5 stars, then I don't think I shouldn't really pressure you. But, you know, if you think it's worth it, then that would really help bump me up the list of recommendations to people. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Well done on getting through to the end. It's been a shit one. I will also leave in the show notes the change.org petition to reopen Levena's case, which is very important. I've signed it. I think they're 5,000 signatures short. They've got 70 out of 75,000. So if you're able to, please go and sign. And I will catch you guys next time. Goodbye, my friends.